Hi, it's Patrick. In this video, I'm going to show you how to create a basic 4-page left navigation website in Dreamweaver Creative Cloud. First thing I'm going to do, I'm going to close this. I'm going to go to File, New. I'm going to create a new HTML, no layout. I'm going to make sure it's HTML5. First thing I do is I save my file. I'm going to save this in 502. I'm going to call it left nav example. I'm going to make sure my file name has no spaces, it's all lowercase. Down here I'm going to give a title, Fun with Dreamweaver. Okay, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to change to design view. I'm going to come to the insert panel and I'm going to do an ID equals container. I'm going to get rid of this text over here and make some space. Now I'm assuming, if you're watching this, that you already know the basics of HTML, that you know the basics of CSS, and that you just want to understand how to create a basic website in Dreamweaver. In a previous video I showed how to do a top navigation, so I'm going to really focus on left navigation with this site. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go over here and I'm going to use the header tag in HTML5. I'll put my cursor after this. I'm going to do navigation, and within this I'm just going to go ahead and add some text here. Start a new line, then going to add a section tag and then a footer tag. Footer, I tend to just have basic copyright information. So I'm just going to Google dummy text. This is just going to give me some text to really fill in my page. I go where it says content and I'm going to paste that in the HTML view. So now I'm going to add some heading tags. I'm going to go to the header, that's going to be my H1. My next level, I'm going to make some space. I'm going to do a page level heading. That would be my H2. And then I'll assume that I'm going to have some type of subheading, and that would be my H3. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to link this to this current page. I'm going to link this to left nav page1.html. This page doesn't exist yet, but I'm just going to add the link because I'm going to eventually do a save as and create it. And basically I'm just creating new links for each of these following the same kind of convention, being consistent with my naming. You'd normally want to come up with a better naming system than, say, left nav page 1, because a page name should be intuitive, it should make sense, it should follow logic. So I'm going to preview this, and so far this is the basic of my page. Now it doesn't look like much because we haven't used any CSS, so we're going to basically have this content float to the right and the navigation will stay on the left. So the first thing I'm going to do now is I'm going to actually create each of these other pages. So I'm going to copy this and I'm going to basically create my new pages. I'm going to do a save as, make sure it's in my 502 folder. I'm going to change the heading so I can remember what page it is. And I'm just going to repeat those steps for the other two pages. Okay, so now I have my 4 pages up here in different tabs. And so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with my home page, make sure it's still in design view. And now I'm going to create my external style sheet. So I'm going to make sure that CSS Designer is open over here. I'm going to hit create a new file and I'm going to browse. I'm going to go to my styles folder. I'm just going to call this left nav. So it's created the CSS file for me, and you'll notice now that I can see it over here and I can switch back and forth. So now we're going to add some basic styles to this page. We're going to start with the body tag. So I'm going to click my CSS, I'm going to move this up, but I'm going to click this, I'm going to make sure it's just the body tag, and then I'm going to go down here. Now you'll notice that the further you pull this over, you'll get this 2 column. There's a sweet spot where it changes. So some people like to work with it like this. I'll do this for a minute or two, but then I'm going to switch back because it takes up a little too much real estate for me. Just going to give a background color of black. I'm going to set my font family for the site. Let's start here, but I'm going to actually make my first one Arial. Okay, so you can't see much yet, but it'll start to take shape. So I'm going to go to my container, make sure left nav is selected, hit the plus sign, click over here. I'm going to change this background to white. I'm going to jump up to the top and I'm just going to do a fixed width of 960. Now I'm going to go to my navigation and click the plus sign. Give it a background color. I'm going to give it a width. And because I want the navigation to be smaller, I'm going to use pixels. I'm going to do 150 pixels. And I'm going to do 10 pixels of padding all the way around. I'm going to now click on my section. I'm going to make sure left nav, click the plus sign. I'm going to focus first on its width. And if I know my total is 960, and then I have my left nav, which is 150 plus the padding on each side, I know that I want this to be about 800. I also want it to float right. So if I scroll down, I can see here, I can float right. You can see that the width's not quite what I want, right? So this is where I can go back up and I can say, let's try 750. Okay, that starts to look better. Might be able to get closer to 775. Now you'll notice that it's showing up down below. So if I actually go back to my navigation, I want that to float left. Notice how what it just did, it popped right up. Now notice that there's something funky with my footer, and that's okay, we'll figure this out. So what we're going to do now is we're going to focus on the footer. And the biggest thing we need to do right now with the footer is we need to clear both. So if I go down here, if I click that, you can see the arrow is telling you what it does. It's basically pushing it down, so that looks good. I'm going to change the font size here to pixels. I'm going to do 12 pixels. I'm going to text align. It's one of the few times I do that. And in this case, I'm going to make the background color black. I'm going to make the font color white. Let's save all and let's preview. Okay, could definitely use some padding here. Could definitely do some things up here. But for now, you can see the site taking shape. And because we created an external site, you'll notice that when I click on these other pages, I don't see it yet. But now if I go through, if I go to Format, CSS Styles, I can attach that style sheet and it will apply it to every one of those pages. Okay, so let's go back and let's go to our section and let's add some padding to that. So you can see how it pushed it down a little. Well, a simple way to fix that, and it's just because the added width of the padding and the width of each of these became greater than the width of the container. But if I change this to 770, notice how it pops right back up there. Now we'll notice that the top alignment's not great, so we'll want to work on that. But for now, the padding looks good all the way around, so we'll first focus on this. And this is really kind of focusing on the idea of CARP, contrast, alignment, repetition, proximity. My contrast looks pretty good. The navigation could be a little better, perhaps white might pop off the screen a little better, but it's more the spacing, this alignment, and proximity I can focus on. So I'm going to first go to my H2. I'm going to click here. I'm going to click H2. And I'm going to put a 0 pixels for margin up top. See how that brought it up? And then the bottom margin, I'm going to do 3 pixels. Okay, so now I'm going to click on my H3. And I'm going to give it a bottom margin of 1 pixel. And I can adjust these if they don't look right. So you notice how that pulled it up. This did not. So it's something that you want to look at your HTML and sometimes see what's going on. So this has a paragraph tag here. In this case, right, we have the same thing. Let's go over here and let's apply source formatting. And what I'll do often is I'll go to my paragraph tag and I'll give it a top margin of 0, and then often I'll also focus on a line height to help improve readability. I could even focus on my basic font size if I wanted to for my container. And then now let's focus on the header. I'm going to have the header text float right. I'm going to change the font family. I'm going to still stick with that basic one, but I want that first font, if the user has it, to be Verdana. I also want this background color to be different. So with the header selected, I'm going to make sure that my margin is 0. I'm going to start off with a padding at 10 pixels and see how that looks. Let's save all and preview. Definitely need to work on some contrast, but you can see the basic feel. Now that we've attached this, so we have a problem with the last page, so we can figure out what's going on there. So I can see what happened was when I was naming it, I forgot to have that period, right, in the HTML extension. Not difficult to fix with a small site like this, but you can see why you'd want to check all your links ideally to make sure that they worked. And I started to, but I didn't check all of them. So it's just important to be consistent. So I'm going to go back to this heading, and I'm specifically going to focus on my H1, and I'm going to add a color. So under this, I'm going to actually add a span. And the way I'm going to do this, I'm going to actually just pull this aside and come up here, and I want this still to all be within my H1 because it's all part of my header, but I'm going to have a break, span, and then I'm going to say Dreamweaver. I'm going to close that span tag. So right now it's not that exciting, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a class. Click plus, I'm going to say subheading, start with a period, no spaces, all lowercase. I'm going to change this font to white. So now I'm going to go over to this span tag, and I can highlight it is one way I can do that, right? And if I'm down here, I can look for subheading, and I can do something like that. Now I could even sit there and play with that subheading some more. So let's come back to this. Click subheading. So I could actually even make that font size, make it increase a little. Something like this. So now let's take a look at what we've done. So just like that, I created a basic website with a left navigation. I could probably add some styles for these links if I wanted to do a couple more things here, but for the most part you should see that it goes from page to page. Now you'll notice that we have to actually add the text here because we didn't add that HTML so the HTML won't cascade itself. But that's pretty easy to update. So basically we just go in here and we can just select everything in the H1, and we could just go everywhere where we see this, paste that in. You got to be careful always when doing this because you don't want to create any errors by pasting in code you don't need. And so one of the things you can always do is go to Command Clean Up HTML and see if it finds any errors, and it doesn't. So that looks good there. Two last things, we'll focus on the navigation. I'll make this bigger. Now you could, within the navigation itself, we could, even though it's floating to the left, we could have the text float to the right. We could change the color of the text if we wanted to. Now that's not going to initially change this because there's actually these links. So what this would do to show you is it's making the basic font white, but the rest of it, because it's a link, is by default, unless I add a style to that, is going to be different. So what I could do, for instance, is I can click on this, I can click this plus sign, and I could do a hover, and then click over here, and this is a pseudo class. And so this is where I could change basic things. So I could say, let's see what it would look like if the font was white. Might not look good, but this is the only way that you can kind of experiment with things. Text decoration, I can do none, and it's going to get rid of that underline. Alright, let's go ahead and preview because we can't see it right here. You can always check out the live view, and it will give you some options. And notice how it is giving me that hover. But what I could also do is perhaps what I want is I want this to be the A tag. I want my links to be white, but I want my actual, got to make sure you add the right curly brace. So I don't want a color on my hover, and I want a text direction none on both. So this one makes sense real quick, I hope. Alright, so now basically what I did is I got rid of the underline, whether I hovered or not. But now what I do want is I want my hover, basically when the cursor goes over, I do want it to change color. So this is where I could sit here and play with my colors. I could use this picker and see what it would be like if I went with something like that. I'm going to add that closing. I'm going to go back to this. I'm going to make that big. I'm going to make this narrow. I'm going to save all and preview. Okay, see, now that works as I mouse over. I could decide to get rid of this navigation, but hopefully this helps you see a basic way of creating a website in Dreamweaver Creative Cloud with the left navigation. I'll show you two other things before we wrap this up. I could always, if I want my div, my container div to center, if I go down here and give an auto left for a margin and an auto right, if I save it all and I preview, you should be able to see that then it centered the div. Now, my actual background right now of my page is black, so you can't see the difference that well, but hopefully this helps you get an idea. Now, if you wanted to just change this navigation and put it on the right, you would simply focus on each one of the section. If you remember, we had float right, well, we would just change it to float left. Then, if we take our navigation and change that, what we should see is it just changes the direction. Much the same way, and you remember actually it was my header, I had float right. If I change that, so just like that, that could kind of change the feel of the site. Be sure to validate your code and also spell check to make sure that you have no spelling errors. Thanks.